Okay. Ricky Flex. This movie takes on a theme of David versus Goliath, right? The little guy, right, versus the most powerful structures, right, financially in the world. So, do you think this movie did a good job of capturing that David versus Goliath feel?
Yeah, this is definitely a crowd pleaser for, the dumb money, the retail investors, us, normal people, right? I think you have a Seth Rogen, Vincent D'Onofrio, Ron Swan, Nick Offerman, kind of leading the charge of being like the snubby billionaires, right? They did a great job versus, the America Ferrera who we just saw in Barbie being the normal mom. She's the stonk mom here, right? You have a Paul Dano, Keith Gill doing a great roaring kitty, basically impersonation half the time, but also a solid lead to hold down the movie performance. So yeah, definitely a crowd pleaser, holding the line, holding the movie together was Paul Dano, and it's a fun movie. It's a very fun movie. It's a very Craig Gillespie movie. It's zippy. It's fast. It goes through. I think the first 30 minutes we'll touch on. Definitely a little slower because it's bouncing around between all these different storylines. But once it finds its rhythm with Paul Dano and that story, I think it's really, really quick, properly paced. Uh, I'll stop there and let you go. But there are other like elements to this that I'll comment on later.
I think it did a solid job with the David versus Goliath story. And the parts where it goes into this all these different supporting characters and jumps around, it doesn't really give serviceable screen time to anyone really aside from Paul Dano. And that happens towards the latter half of the movie. But it does a good job depicting as like these some of these essential workers and some of these people that are working DoorDash and some of these college students that are getting in on GameStop. And it shows really like that underdog story, like the people that never thought they were going to benefit from the stock market have a chance. And it's led by this dude on YouTube that I didn't even know at the time. The Roaring Kitty guy, like I knew what was happening with Wall Street bets and everything, but I never heard of this guy. And to hear his story, I thought was pretty interesting. The only thing was Ricky Flicks, and we could talk about this because it's a true story. Like the David versus Goliath story, like David ends up winning. Okay. And what I remember, what I take from this entire sequence of events in 2020 is that it kind of solidified the fact that the big dogs still remain on top no matter what, right? With like Vlad shutting down Robinhood, right? And not allowing any movement on GameStop. I was thinking to myself, I remember there's backlash on it, but I still remember the billionaires, like for the most part, got away with all this, And like there's this parts at the end of the movie where they're trying to paint like the Offerman character and the Seth Rogen character and Vlad as like, oh, they're the huge losers out of this. But I remember like living in the time period, I was just like, they got away with it again. I thought that was the main takeaway. And I don't know. I think the movie did a good job painting them as the villains. Okay. But I don't think they lost this battle as much as like the movie insinuates. Am I crazy for thinking that?
Yeah, you're right. I think I don't want to compare this, but I am. We just have to. The Big Short, they do a great job at the end, kind of telling us like who won and lost, and that tone throughout the movie was kind of building up to that. This tone was like, oh, all the little guy's gonna win the entire time. So it kind of struggled at the end where it kind of ended abruptly because it was like, oh, like some little guys won, but like the music's like I'm a Savage like was playing, TikTok, and like you're seeing a Ferrari with Pete Davidson, you're seeing Anthony Ramos dancing and things like that. But then like Ken Griffin's fine. Gabe Klopkin just bought the Hornets. Like he's
Yeah.
doing okay. Steve Cohen obviously is doing okay. Like 0.72 is unbelievable. But and he owns the Mets. But it didn't do a good job explaining it at the end. It really didn't. A lot of words, like nothing shown on screen. Just a weird ending, just very abrupt. So you're right. And I think versus the Big Short, where you used to say, oh, only one person got arrested. The classic McKay, like, oh, you're assuming that all these people went to jail. No, only one person. And it kind of set the tone for the movie. Or it was with the tone of the movie versus this was like you kind of had to have that feel good effect because it's such a crowd pleasing movie. So I don't know. It just kind of lost its way at the very end.
Yeah, they kind of had a decision to make. Like the ending of The Big Short, it feels like as much as there's comedy infused there, like it ends tragically. It ends on a sad note because like we are in a terrible state right now. And it has like the crowd pleasing moment in Big Short has to do with like the Brad Pitt right? And the Finn Whitrock part of the movie, which is a small portion of a small subplot, you know? And here they chose to end it as a crowd pleaser, right? Which is okay. And I think the David of the David and Goliath is really just the Paul Dano, like Paul Dano as Roaring Kitty. He ends up, right, financially successful because of this. He can shut down his YouTube. He doesn't ever work again. He earned tens of millions of dollars, you know? So I just thought that was an interesting decision just to make it a crowd pleaser. But I wanted to go into some parts of stock market movies that people always look to. It's like the financial jargon. How is it explained? In Big Short, they do it creatively. They bring in Selena Gomez, Margot Robbie, Anthony Bourdain, rest in peace, right? To explain some, I guess, difficult things to understand for common audiences. How do you think they did explaining what was happening with GameStop from this film? Do you think they were successful in what they were trying to do? And do you think like an average audience member can get a sense of what was actually happening?
Yeah, I think similar to The Big Short, where I think they did a good job with like incorporating the financial jargon here, as you said. I think I'm happy that they didn't do what The Big Short did. I don't think any business movie could ever do that, like pan away shot to explain something again, or like you know what I mean? I think that's always going to be the Big Shorts thing, the Adam McKay thing in The Big Short. And if you're ever a business movie or a stock market movie, you can't do it again. So I'm just happy because you'll always be thinking about The Big Short then, and you can't be doing that. So I'm happy they didn't do that. And here, like, you just have to know, like, they're not selling. You know, that's all you got to understand. Like, diamond hands, you're not selling, right? And to the moon, like, you're holding the stock and it's through to the moon, like as high as possible. That's really all you got to know, right? So this financial jargon is not like a credit default swap, but we're trying to understand these debt instruments and incorporated with these bond ratings and just everything related to that. I think it's just a lot more complicated versus this is just like, you know what? This is a fun Reddit thing, right? Some honestly Reddit jargon, and it's holding the line. You're just holding the stock, and then you're gonna sell. You're never gonna sell, basically. You're not. So easy to follow movie.
Easy to follow, and I think that is good because like this was a social media movement, and a lot of people getting invested into GameStop didn't know much about the stock market. All you had to understand was we're not selling, you know? And that's the same thing that this movie does. It's just all you have to understand is that the people that portray the David and the David versus Goliath, we're not selling diamond hands. And you almost replace the cameos in Big Short. In this movie, you just get memes and you get social media posts that kind of replace, explain, give context to what's happening. And I thought it was successful in that regard. And I think it provided some of the biggest laughs of the movie. I thought this movie was funny and it was amusing to me. And to like relive some of those memes from the moment, I was it didn't like didn't disturb me. I didn't think about like the dark times of the pandemic. I'm like, what a ridiculous movement this was. And seeing like that dude once again who populated the timeline with the animated slick back hair, Johnny Bravo looking with the shades with WSB. I'm like, oh my God. When this thing was taken off, like you couldn't scroll the timeline without seeing everything about GameStop, right? Holding the line, diamond hands, WSB. I was just like, yeah, this is awesome. And I thought they did some really nice montages. And it was one of my favorite parts of the movie. It was like 1 minute of just boom, boom, boom. They're hitting you over the top, one after the other. And I didn't think it was very cringy. There's other points where I thought they incorporate some social media stuff, some TikTok, like the Savage Dance, Anthony Ramos. I'm like, ugh, that's where like Hollywood is showing like they're a little bit out of touch. But everything else, I think they had a pretty solid understanding. Do you think like the usage of like social media from that time was helpful to this movie? Do you think it enhanced the story?
I think it did. There were parts where there was so many internet social media montages where I was like, all right, like let's tone it down here. But you're right, like that wasn't the cringy part. I think the cringy part was what you said, or like trying to explain each of their like these retail investors, each of the individual minor storylines. Like, oh, my dad worked at this grocery store, and like something that like we don't need to hear here really. Like we don't. Like it's trying to incorporate some sort of story and depth to these characters when it just breezes the top of the line. It's really like, okay, fine. Yeah, you're holding the line, you want to make a lot of money, but you want to beat the big bad guys who screwed you in your life at some point, whether your dad was screwed or whether you're working for GameStop, and getting screwed by management, having to sell these stupid games when you want to sell whatever games you want. This movie just didn't have a lot of depth. But going back to the internet montages, I think those were some of like in a Greg Gillespie, the pacing type movie that really complemented this style of movie, especially with the GameStop like era being so short. So I think it also matched with that vibe as well.
I agree. This movie was a little bit shallow in terms of like the financial explanation and in the supporting characters. And I think they didn't need as many big names for this movie, but I think it's such an attractive story. And they knew people would go to like movie theaters to see it. That's why you get like Sebastian Stan here, Nick Offerman, Anthony Ramos, Shailene Woodley, like name after name, despite being written so shallowly. And I thought the one character that was written very well was Paul Dano. Like, make decently well, because I think he disappears a little bit, right? When it gets to that 1/3 to third of the way through to about the halfway point, he's kind of gone, and they just like flip the camera to all these different characters, and they try and like give you a context of what's happening. But I thought Paul Dano was great in this movie. I thought from the middle point till the end, he held the movie down. Like, he gave you someone to like look towards to this in this movie. And I think they did a nice job writing his character in terms of like him being impacted by the pandemic, him with the family aspect with Shailene Woodley and having a daughter, the job insecurity of being this guy that is on this YouTube streams or Twitch streams, right, with the Roaring Kitty persona. I thought that was well done. And I thought like him with the running sequences, even like his bouncing on Pete Davidson, family perspective with Clancy Brown. I thought I don't know. He seemed like a human, right? He humanized a guy like usually you see in front of like a YouTube screen that you think is just like, oh, this guy's just trying to get clicks. He's trying to get money, this, that. I thought he brought a genuineness to the character that I don't think you got from anybody else in this movie, really. And that's what you expect from a Paul Dano, is playing such a weird, like Paul Dano playing a YouTuber. Like, what? Like, that makes no sense with like the nuanced characters he typically plays. But I thought like it didn't seem that cringy, like for a guy like Paul Dano. I don't even think he's on social media, which made it an even more interesting pick to play the lead role here. But I thought he held it down. He gave us a focus towards the back half, and he has an excellent monologue at the end that gave me a little bit of Matt Damon and Air vibes. That crowd pleasing moment. He knew how to feed it to you. How do you think Paul Dano did here?
Yeah, you always need in one of these movies, like these stock market business type movies, entrepreneurial type movies, it's like Air. You always need like a riveting or compelling like lead character, but a monologue. You need like that. Oh, like we always talk about an Oscar moment for these movies. Like this movie's not gonna get any Oscar nominations, but like, you need like a moment here, that crowd pleasing moment. Air's a great comp. Like that's exactly what this is. Similar type of movie, feel good, big stars everywhere, but your lead's gonna give you what you want at the end, and that's what they do here. And I think a drawback to this movie, just not to get off topic here, but a little bit, is that a lot of this, like half the movie, like Paul Dano, like a lot of his like when he's on camera, like in his YouTube, that's just like doing what has already been done, impersonation. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
this is impersonation versus acting, but I think Paul Dano can give some depth in those off the camera screens with a Shailene Woodley or Pete Davidson or his family that were a little better, or like actually acting. And then you could tell like, oh, he's a good actor. He's not just impersonating here. And I think that's helpful to see as well. But yeah, I think a lot of this movie was just retelling of events, like a documentary versus like actually a in-depth movie about a single character. I think that maybe if it was just a Paul Dano movie with maybe they dive deeper into the trauma around COVID and his sister unfortunately passing and the family dynamics and things like that, I think it'd be probably a little deeper and a little better, to be honest. But no, they decided to go star-studded cast, focus on the other style of essential workers that are retail investors in the COVID era versus the big bad guys of the Steve Cohens and whatnot.
I think I agree with you, where if it had more of a focus, just Paul Dano throughout, like the movie would have been in a better place. I know you kind of have to like talk about all these different people that invested into GameStop at the time, how they were impacted either positive or negatively. And I really do think the second half of the movie did become like Paul Dano focused, and I think that's where the movie excelled and did its best. And to go on with like some of the other performances here, supporting wise, we got a massive like A-list cast here. We did like a draft, obviously, of like the best performances of the cast in Dumb Money. So I wanted to get a perspective on maybe we stay away from the villains here and talk more about the supporting guys like a Shailene Woodley, a Pete Davidson, and Anthony Ramos, right? America Ferrera. Did anyone stand out to you? Okay. I know we talked about their hopping around a lot, not a lot of character development, but did anyone shine in your opinion?
I think Pete Davidson was good. Let's be positive. I know I kind of crapped on him on Friday's episode, but I thought he was good. Again, like smaller role, and same thing in last year's A24 with Rachel Sennett, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. He was good in that, but it's like he's just Pete Davidson, so it's not like, it's like, how hard is it? But going off of Paul Dano, that's impressive. Paul Dano is a well-established actor. He is legit, so I was happy to see that for Pete Davidson. I also just want to shout out Seth Rogen. I think Seth Rogen did a good job here too. I know it's not necessarily the hardest role either, but I think he played off that persona of like one of the big guys that's coming, like his house is falling down. Like I think that he did a good job. And again, like none of these are Oscar or like, holy crap, that was a heck of a performance. But if we're just gonna shout out a couple names, like I think those two, I just wanted to shout out, just say, hey, that I enjoyed those two guys in this movie.
Yeah, I thought Pete Davidson was being Pete Davidson, but it is a tall task when you go toe to toe with Paul Dano. Like when you're sharing scenes with a guy who's been nominated for an Oscar, that's not the easiest thing. Right? Dano's been nominated.
Unfortunately, he hasn't.
What? That's
I don't
crazy
think so. Remember, because he was supposed to be.
I'm over 2 talking about nominations this week. But continuing, I thought Rogen, he kind of was just shaking in his boots the entire time. That was kind of my beef with the villains of the movie, between like Vlad and played by Sebastian Stan, and then Plotkin with Rogen. They're just some people that are crapping their pants because they don't understand what's happening. Like they can't believe what's happening to them. But I thought Rogen, his best scenes were with Winslow Bright, his wife, and at the time where she's asking how much money have we lost, he's like $1 billion. How much did we lose yesterday? $1 billion. But she's calm and composed because I think it gives off that vibe. She knows everything will end up fine. Like she has bet. You could tell they have been through this situation as a couple before. Like they've been through like, oh, we're losing all this money. And she hands Rogen a phone at one point saying, just make the call to Steve Cohen. Just make a call. You're always going to be bailed out. Things might be awful. We might lose $2 billion in 2 days, but we're going to be fine, And I think that kind of like put me back in that perspective back in 2020, where it's like, these people are never going to lose. Okay. Unless I don't know, just there's no way these people are going to lose everything. Right. And I thought that was like a low key performance from Winslow Bright, but also very good. I don't even know who that actress is. Have you heard of her before?
No, but she looked familiar. I'll have to do a quick IMDb page.
And she was like interesting because she was so calm, reserved compared to like a Shailene Woodley, who I also thought was good in this movie, who is like basically playing a concerned character at all times, but also emotional and heartwarming. She kind of played like the sports movie wife, I guess, throughout, where it's like the comeback story, this, and like she's kind of holding Paul Dano down, making him aware of like the family and stuff. It seemed like pretty prototypical for a sports movie performance, but I thought she was solid as well. I haven't seen her do much recently, but I thought she was also not a standout, but just a solid performance.
I think that's the perfect thing to say. I think Paul Dano, I think, is a standout here, but just because he's the guy in this movie. Everyone else was just solid. I don't think anyone was bad. I think, I think it was just solid performances all around. By the way, it's Olivia Thirlby who was Seth Rogen's wife in this.
Oh, I thought it was Winslow, right?
The reason why I recognize her, she was just in Oppenheimer.
Ah,
she was the one in the scene where right after Germany surrenders and it's in the rain, and Oppie goes into the union meeting or whatever. And they're saying, like, why are we still working on this? We're not going to use it. Germany's surrendered. Japan's going to surrender. And then she, like, goes up and says that, basically, like, stands up to Oppie. She's that person. She's also in, like, Juno and a couple other the Stanford prisoner experiment. But yeah, everyone's solid. I don't think anyone's bad. I think just to talk about this guy, because I talked about him on Friday, Sebastian Stan. Again, more of an impersonation.
Definitely.
But spot on. Like, it was pretty good.
And they portrayed him like the way you expect they were going to portray the guy Robin Hood who shut down the GameStop stock. Like he portrayed him as a scumbag, and he was good at playing the scumbag. You know, it was pretty spot on. But it was just there was an enjoyment of watching this in the audience and seeing him during that deposition, right? Like him shaking in his boots and like the camera closing in on the shaking legs and the trembling hands. It's like this guy deserves to like be punished. And I don't know if he kind of got away with this, you know. I like he got away with it a little bit. That's where it's like the David versus Goliath story. Like Goliath still kind of won, right? Like Vlad still has Robin Hood, and like obviously he takes a hit from Robin Hood and everything like that. But people still are trading on it today, you know. I think it's one of the more popular common man trading apps.
Still is,
you know. So it's just like this guy obviously is a jerk, and it was like good to see him shaking in his boots. But man, like he got away with it.
Yeah, and I think if the movie struggled with any financial acumen, it would be what he did in the Citadel Securities, trying to describe like how Robin Hood makes money and that whole situation, that sequence. I think the movie did struggle trying to explain that, but
like in the interviews, right?
Yes, and throughout anytime Vlad was on talking about what Robin Hood does and how they're involved in this, but all you got to know is Citadel Securities, Ken Griffin, I almost did it again. Nick Offerman's character is connected, basically is a big time partner with Robin Hood, and they basically shut down the option to buy for a short time. That's what you got to know. That's it, and that's what you got from the movie. They did a bad job explaining how, but end of the day, you get the picture, and I think that's all you need to know in this movie. That's really surface level, like the entire movie and all these characters for the most part.
And Nick Offerman was like noticeably absent from a lot of this movie. And like he was kind of portrayed as the main villain by the end. You know, that's what I thought was a little weird. He didn't have the screen time, yet he is like the man basically behind the curtain. He's like the Oz, right? Like for this entire operation.
That's a good comp.
And he's rarely seen or referred to. And more screen time is given to like the Seth Rogen sweating it out, or the Vlad, right? Who just kind of comes off as like an idiot, right? As someone who's way too overconfident but doesn't have a firm understanding of what exactly is happening. So I thought we could have used more Nick Offerman. And another villain portrayal that wasn't really a villain, but like got a really bad look during this whole sequence of events in 2020 with Steve Cohen. Like they made Steve Cohen look good in this movie.
I agree.
Like, and like the way like Vincent D'Onofrio played him, very likable. And it's odd because also in moments he is basically hating on Citadel, and he's hating on Nick Offerman, and he's calling him like without indirectly a scumbag. And I'm just like, this guy also played a pretty big part in the sequel in what happened, right, with GameStop, and they're making it seem like he was just like he was innocent in all of it. And I found that really odd because I remember at the time he had to delete his Twitter account, like, or yes. he deactivated it for a little bit, like during that time. Like he was taking heat at that time, and they made it seem like he's like the billionaire that's the nice guy, the good guy. I just thought that was a weird approach to his character.
Yeah, he looks better coming out of this than before. Like he's still not good, but because like it's just another cringy thing, like a pig in the house. I was just like, yeah, okay, way too direct. We don't need to be doing that. But usually, I think another key part about this movie that makes it unique versus other movies we'll probably talk about is that these movies are usually about the bad people. You know, they're about like the bad people, or like The Big Short, where nothing has changed, right? And this kind of does the latter with it in an uplifting way for like the little guys, obviously. But you know, think of Wolf of Wall Street, like. Jordan Belfort's not a good human, but we're rooting for him so hard. And then we see his downfall. Here it's like we see the like uplifting throughout the end. And then briefly at the end, they say, oh, but the good guys keep going, or the bad guys keep, nothing changed, you know? So it's just like, it just didn't work at the very end. But again, like this is different. And I appreciate like uniqueness in Hollywood because, you know, we always see a formula. We always talk about being a formula, movies being in a formula. And I think this is a little different, even though it's very Craig Gillespie. The way they do it in this topic, I think, was very unique, and I liked it a lot.
The ending is different. Most stock market movies do not end well, like historically. Like
Right.
it's hard to find that it has like an overwhelming amount of like support or enjoyment at the end. The audience can walk away saying, "Oh, like this smiling," when they're leaving the theater.
Mm.
And this one, when you like saw the Paul Dano character, when they centered on him, and you saw like he has the big moment that is amplifying like the character, and walking out and seeing like some of these guys didn't get away with it, right? And they leave out a lot of context with a lot of like the Gabe Plotkin or like the Nick Offerman character or the Vlad with Sebastian Stan. It just wanted to make sure, because the pandemic was such a dark time for a lot of people, and it doesn't give like a lot of it doesn't bring up a lot of positive memories. They want to walk away from this saying like, okay, David can't beat Goliath. It just felt crowd pleasing. It felt like that sports movie type of feel. Um, yeah. And I think I was going to ask you, like, did the ending pack a punch? I think we kind of agree, like, not as much as, like, if it ended honestly, like more honestly, with more truth. Like, there is, like, a silver lining to look at here with
Hmm.
all these different characters and with the events that transpire. But any other thoughts on whether the ending was strong enough, or did it pack that punch? Did it hit you at the end?
Yeah, no, I think because our sister went to see this with us, and I was sitting next to her. Obviously, you were as well, but it was like they started showing like all the different what's it called, the words on the screen at the end. I was like, oh crap, this is the end. I was like, wow, like this is like ending like this.
Felt abrupt.
Yeah, it just felt abrupt, and I think it's just worth noting again. And I think that's a weakness in this style of movie, where again, like it had a great monologue that this style of movie has with the Keith Gill, Rory Kitty, Paul Dano's character. But then after that, you really felt the downfall of this movie, or like not downfall of this movie, but like this movie started going a free fall. You know?
Yeah, a little bit. It was a little helter skelter.
Yeah, Helter Skelter is a better
Yeah.
word. Like Free Fall is not like it's this movie's not bad. It's a good movie. But yeah, it just felt weird, a little weird in the final 10, 15 minutes.
The beginning and end both felt like, okay, it seems like we're kind of juggling here, right? And
Juggling.
like, and like when Paul Dano's not holding it down, it feels like it's a little too chaotic. But scores, what do you give Dumb Money?
I give it a 74.
Okay.
74 for me.
76 for me. Similar pages there. That's gonna do it for our review of Dumb Money.